of the society in which they were performing. They were socio-political, and they very often dealt with traditional narratives. So there was very often a sense of drama, or they made fun of particular figures within the society. So they also dealt with some of the sort of mythological stories, and this is an old example where you can see it's like a red ochre on it. You'll see others like this who are so strident. I mean, I always think those are kind of pneumatic breasts, you know. I mean, she's kind of very, she's very forward, and you know, painted with these bright yellow enamels. And of course, Egon Gunther would have turned in his grave rather than buy a piece like this. But these really spoke to the kind of sassiness of contemporary Africa that particularly interested Anna. Here you have a figure which would have been used as one of the puppets. Very strong geometric forms, wonderful use of color again. And we see that same use of color moving into the Yoruba Galeri masks. Anna had a particular penchant for collecting Yoruba pieces. They were very popular in the 1960s, particularly in America. Their market was very high. One paid extremely high prices for Yoruba pieces. And these Galeri masks were danced by men, and they were day-long performances, and the dancers were there to honor the matriarchs, the female power within the society, which is so interesting. And but as you can see, they're very complexly carved. So there's a narrative which seems to enfold in on itself, and they are snake-like forms. They're animals. There's a fantastic little animal with his front sort of hooves over each other in the middle. These very wide-eyed faces with these scarifications on the cheeks. So here you get some sense of the vivacity that was very much part of these performances. But as I mentioned earlier, they really talk to matriarchal power within the society. We have rather delightful figures, also in a very similar vein to their neighbors. These are the Ewe, and they're also one of the Akan groups, which you can very often see in the necks, where you have this sort of double fold in the necks, which is like a fat neck, which is the sign of wealth. This looks like a very surprised mother. Unfortunately, I haven't shown you the child on the back, but this very brightly painted clothing seems to reveal more than it conceals. And she has these very neat little shoes on. We also have these shrine figures, which were very important. They were placed on the shrines so that they do represent the ancestors. Their hands are on this forward position. One is not sure whether they are giving or receiving. And they're very often painted in the white ochre, which is associated with the ancestral realm as is the blue colouring which we see on the Yoruba pieces as well, which came from the rickets blue, which was used to give this very vivid quality to many of the sculptures before enamel paint was around. Close-ups of them, and you can see these kind of hued surfaces and the sort of chalky whiteness, which is very different to the enamel paints. And that chalky whiteness is associated, as I said, with the ancestral realm, so they are not a sort of jivey, fun objects. They are much more recessive in their way and the way they sit on the altars. Beautiful figures who sit on horses, also ancestors. Here we have a young female woman. She's in the nude. She sits on this little donkey, charmingly carved, both of them. They both have a kind of innocence to them. And she has that same neck which we've seen previously in the icon pieces. And there's a companion piece in the collection of a man on a horse. And of course he is clothed in colonial dress and has a pith helmet. And so that really does talk to this kind of shift in clothing and value. So very often in traditional African art, the women are shown traditionally dressed, the men are shown dressed in Western clothing. So one starts to see those differences very clearly. The beautiful head of this horse. Also a young woman who sits on a typical Ashanti chair, uncollected, very beautiful Ashanti chairs, which I'm not showing here, but do go and have a look at them. They are really some of the finest ones I've seen. They have lions and leopards and elephants and people underneath them, so they're very figurative. And the same kind of stool that she is sitting on here. She has this kind of questioning air to her, those hands which open out in front of her, the kind of wide-eyedness. A delightful pair of Ewe twin figures. So amongst the Ewe and the Yoruba, there is a propensity genetically to have twins, and the twins are highly revered, but they very often die shortly after childbirth. And because of that, these little figures very often are carved to memorialize the twins, and they are cared for and looked after. But what I think really piqued Anna's interest here was these two youngsters are in their costumes, and they have a kind of innocent beauty to them that is really very beguiling. So here we see a typical pair of Yoruba Ibeji figures, and these figures, as I mentioned, have been carved after the death of the child, and it was believed that the spirit of the two children would enter the Ibeji figures. And if you look at the patina of these figures, you will see that they were traditionally normally dressed, and they were bathed, and they were put to bed. So these figures actually housed the spirit of the deceased children. And so it's actually an amazing tradition, because in many hospitals they have found that if they take a Polaroid, in the 60s, or most probably now still, if they could take a photograph of the dead child and give it to the mother, they had something to mourn over. whereas if there was no evidence of the child, the mothers very often couldn't actually get over that mourning. So it's a very beautiful way of engaging that sense of loss and continuity into the ancestral world. A contemporary version of the Ibeji figures. These apparently were they were made in Nigeria. I mean, to me they look as though they're made in China, but they're very European. But they still had the function of the Ibeji figures, and so they will continue to be used right into the present. And we saw them on the cover of Susan Vogel's book. Here we have a really very beautiful Yoruba guardian figure. He most probably stood on an altar, and he's quite large, and he, in his hand, you can't really see it in the photograph very well, but he holds a Shango staff, which is it's a small wooden, almost like a chopper, and that signifies that he is a follower of Shango, the goddess of thunder. So this very, very powerful female figure who is integrated into Yoruba culture. The figure has these beautiful eyes which are geometricized here rather than those sort of more almond-shaped eyes that we've seen before. What is unusual is that he doesn't have a patina on him of the white ash, but there is a glowing patina on him that is quite extraordinary. So this figure, and you'll see the figure that stands next to it, are the two much more traditional figures that Anna owned, and she particularly loved them. They're large, and they have a real sense of gravitas to them, which is very different to the kind of quirky funness of the rest of the collection. But I mean, a very powerful face that this figure has. I'm not quite sure, it most probably comes from Burkina Faso. It could be a group called Lobi, but the style moves towards that area, but it's not absolutely typical. A wonderful pair of Yoruba guardian figures, but here translated into two soldiers. That they're dressed with epaulets, with uniforms and guns, and they are painted in red and green enamel, and they are a far cry from the ancestral figures that we've just looked at. They really engage the present, and they really talk to the urbanization of power. And I'm always a bit amused at them because they don't stand kind of four square. They kind of lean in as though they're a little bit unstable. So there's a kind of wittiness in that. Then we have the wonderful Mummy Wata figures. Anna's got two Mummy Wata figures, and these figures were made along the West African and Central African coast by many groups. Mummy Wata is a very powerful female deity who's associated with water, and she also very often has she's associated with serpents, but often she looks like a mermaid, or she has a snake-like body. And here we see a rather haughty version of Mummy Wata, a beauty here. She is really quite exquisitely carved. I I'm not quite sure. She might well be Baole, exquisitely carved, but exquisitely painted. And she has these snakes around her, and she is related to water. She's related to beneficence. She's related to wealth, and she also has the power to heal. So she's had a powerful place in the diasporic African community, particularly in Brazil. And you'll see that Mamiwata is very well known to coffee drinkers around the world. She is absolutely central to the logo of Starbucks. And so there is this kind of undercurrent of this sense of goodwill, feeling good, being blessed, that is associated with her. Anna also had a few pieces from India. They had been collected by Vittorino and Paolina Meneghelli on trips to India, and you can see they also have this contemporary quality to them in their use of color. And these two young figures stand alert. It feels as though they could actually just strike up into a dance. They have a lively, beautiful graciousness to them, and they form part of the family very easily. And so Anna bought this pair, and eventually on a second exhibition, she acquired this 18th century figure from one of the shrines, a very beautifully carved sculpture, painted in sort of ivory white, and with these very elegant gestures. From the moment she arrived, she took up her place in the dining room until Anna's last breath. And so she always had a very special place in the minds and hearts of all of us who came to dinner. You can see the kind of elegance in this face. And so Anna's collection was really made largely by her support and of Vittorino Meneghelli's interest in exploring the world. But Anna also was deeply interested in the world around her, and that she chose to live in this apartment filled with sculptures that made one feel as though you had entered a Mardi Gras. You know, the walls were mirrored, as Kathy mentioned, so everything was amplified. And when you walked in there, you were not quite sure what was real and what was a reflection. And at the same time, all these pieces had a history of talking to the socio-political, to the sacred, to the sense of the societal, and to the greatness of carving and of the continuity of art lived in a society, not just decoration. And I think that interested her particularly. I think the directness, the directness of the works and the political, social qualities are related really to what Anna saw her own role to be, that she was a commentator in much the same way as these pieces were. And so they were integral to her own value system. Kathy did show my work, which was part of two drawings related to ancestral void, and it was a drawing I did shortly after coming back from the Comores, with a very beautiful Comorian, East African, Arabic cloths in it. And it was one of the centerpieces on the Standard Bank exhibition. I had a very large show there. There was a real scramble to acquire works, and I didn't allow anything to be sold until the opening, and Anna couldn't be there, and so she really wanted to work, so she said, choose one for me. So I said, Kath, Anna, that's very difficult. But I chose this one, and she said, oh no, that was the one I would have chosen. That was great relief. And she loved the piece, and it was camouflaged in the rest of the apartment. It was as busy as everything else. And it was with her for most of her life, but as she came towards the end of her life and ran out of money, the work was acquired by a dealer at a record price, and so it was so wonderful. She was absolutely bereft, and he made a very beautiful 2/3 size reproduction, which went back into position and she could breathe again. So it's been so special to hear you, Kathy, share her life and this amazing trajectory from the sadness of Germany. I remember her telling me how, as a young girl, she walked up into the hill to see a British plane that had come down, and to see the dead pilot in that plane that had made such a deep impression on her. Anna hated ugliness. And I said, why, Anna? She said, there was so much ugliness in my youth, I can't bear ugliness. So her quest for beauty and for engaging in the world was very much driven by that early experience. And she loved people, but she loved intelligence above anything else. And so she was a very social person, and I remember her saying, you know, one of the things she liked to do when she went to a gathering where she knew nobody, she would see if there was somebody that she thought could be quite interesting, and she would, it was very often a he, of course, she would walk up to him and she'd say to him, so what is your IQ? That was Anna. The other thing I also so loved, and you know, I learned from it, was I remember one day I was really rather irritated by the disarray of Johannesburg, and talking about how, you know, in the pavements there were all these weeds that were growing, and you know, I really said, well, you know, can they not look after us? She said to me, oh, Karel, you know, I so admire those weeds. She said, you know, it takes them huge effort to actually grow out of it. So it was such a beautiful lesson, you know, and I think if we can actually look at our environment, the political context, and understand where we are and how we can engage it in a creative and an intelligent manner. I think that's what Anna has taught me and many of us and the generations that have passed. Thank you.
Most captivating, I'm sure you'd all agree, both of you, Kathy and Karel. Alastair mentioned this is our last art club, but I think it's arguably the best one in the whole year. Thank you very much for that. Apart from the wonderful African art and the furniture, there's also on the walls Anna's art collection, and she collected Penny Siapis, Kevin Collins, Helmut Starcke, Francis Kendall, John Mafakeju, Colin Mashangwani, Peter Clark, Stanley Pinker, Karel Nel, Different Pie, often talk about, they're all there, but also international artists such as Joe Tilson, Eduardo Barolozzi, Max Ernst, and Richard Longo. The exhibition is on till the 21st of November, till after the G20. You're most welcome to come whenever you want to. I would suggest for one of the catalogue you come and take WhatsApp photographs, and we will email you the catalogue as soon as that's done. The auction, I think, is on the 19th of November. Right.